Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. I'm your host Terry. So today I am at the, I'm actually on the battlefield in Gettysburg right now. I just shot some other video that you'll see in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of set that up. So I came out here to look at some stuff that I had never seen before and you know, learn some more stuff that I didn't know, or kind of take some knowledge that I recently gained and, you know, see the place where what I read about happened. And I always find that really useful. So take a look. So sometimes I find myself walking across fields looking for stuff on Civil War battlefields. So I'm going to a place, and I'll be over this road here you see here behind me. It's a dirt road. It's just called Slyder Farm Road, and it's Slyder, S-L-Y-D-E-R. And I'm going out to the Slyder Farm because it was here during the Battle of Gettysburg, and just to give you an idea, it empties out where the road I was walking from is the Emmitsburg Road. But I'm walking out here because I actually drove down this road a little bit ago, and I got to a point and it said authorized vehicles only. But now I'm not a vehicle, I'm just on foot. And they also have like trails marked where it'll say like, oh, you can come down here on horses or not. And so I'm walking out here because there's a famous area on the Shiloh battlefield in Tennessee that is known as the Hornet's Nest. But there's an area here on the Gettysburg battlefield that has been called a Hornet's Nest, but it's not like the most famous of the Hornet's Nests from the Civil War. But anyway, so off to my right, and I'll kind of swing around so you can see it, but there's a farm, a stone house, and that's the Bushman farm, and that played a big role in the Battle of Gettysburg. I actually love this time of year in Gettysburg because it's there's less people. It's cooler, less people, and it's easier to get around and stop and see things and find stuff. But here's the crazy thing. I've spent a lot of time on this battlefield, and I've never been down this road before. So, but I just finished another book about the battle, and I was like, I gotta go out there and check out that Hornet's Nest area. So here's the Bushman farm. I pan around there, you can see. And probably there are people that live there, and like there are houses on battlefields around the country that are privately owned, and there'll usually be a sign that'll say, it's private property. So you can walk around the place, just don't go knock on the door. So I'll get out here in a little bit and see what I can find. Okay, so to set this scene, that's the Slyder Farm down the lane there. And behind it, you see what is known as Big Round Top or just Round Top. And then this is the monument I came out here to see, although I'm going to see some others. This is and just to further set the scene, so that where you see those cars out there, that is the Emmitsburg Road. And then beyond that, where that line of trees is off in the distance, that's Seminary Ridge. So this is the monument I came out to see, and it's Company D, Maine Volunteers, 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters, and they were engaged here on July 2nd. 1 killed, 5 wounded, 5 missing. And I'll share with you in a bit why that's of interest to me. And the origin of that regiment of sharpshooters, and why they kind of foretold what we would look at as infantry tactics in modern times. So this is a Confederate road here at the Gettysburg National Military Park, and behind me is the parking area up the hill a bit, up that way, is a parking area for Big Round Top, which is actually up there through those trees. But so we're gonna walk back towards the Slider farm, and you may be able to discern a monument out here in the middle. This is to the 1st Vermont Cavalry, and that unit made a charge late in the day on July 3rd, 1863. It was ill-advised. It was ordered by General Judson Kilpatrick, and the Union lost one of its best young cavalry officers, in Elon Farnsworth, who was a brigadier general. And Farnsworth, along with George Custer, had been promoted by General Meade, the commanding general of the Army of the Potomac, just a few days before. He saw these young cavalry officers that had a lot of leadership ability, and he promoted them because he probably wasn't very happy with the cavalry operations to that point. But on this day, on July 3rd, 1863, Custer was detached because his boss was Judson Kilpatrick, but he had been detached and he was serving with David M. Gregg in another part of the battlefield that's now known as the East Cavalry Field. And it's at the intersection of Hanover Road and Low Dutch Road, and that's where they really engaged Stuart's cavalry. But what happened here with the 1st Vermont Cavalry is they kind of just charged into infantry formations, which is always a deadly and maneuver for cavalry if they're not supported by artillery, which they weren't. But I thought it was interesting, on the back of this, they talk about the service of this regiment, and it really gives you an idea about the Civil War. If you look at 2,297 officers and men, killed and mortally wounded in action 102, but died of disease 123, died in Confederate prisons 172, for a total of 397. It's interesting that combat, as intense as it was, often wasn't the reason that people died in the Civil War. Okay, so we're gonna head back down this hill, back to the Slider farm. I'm gonna show you another monument for the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters, and we'll go from there. Okay, so we're back here at the Sliderman farm, and this is the monument to companies E and H. And you recall the other monument that I stopped at that was the 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters was Company D, and those guys were from Maine. And each of the companies was made up of guys from a single state that were formed into that regiment. And this is from E and H, and these guys were from Vermont. So they got the pine cone because Vermont is the Green Mountain State. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. But it is the Green Mountain State, but I guess the pine cone is a symbol too. But these guys, along with that other company, were here, and it points out that they came here on the 2nd of July. They arrived the night before at 6 p.m. and they met the onset of Longstreet's corps near this point. And just to give you an idea, I said Seminary Ridge, which you could still see the trees way off in the distance there. That's where the Corps of, or excuse me, the division of Lafayette McLaws came across these fields and tried to get up to Round Top. And in the background here, if I come over here a little bit, those big rock formations across the way are actually what's known as Devil's Den. And it's a little hard to see them because they're a little bit obscured by the trees, but that's Devil's Den over there. So one of the reasons that I was kind of focused today on the 1st and 2nd U.S. Sharpshooters at Gettysburg was that I was reading about them, and by the way, you may have heard to them referred to as Burden's Sharpshooters, and that was named after Colonel Hiram Burden, B-E-R-D-A-N, who was a native of Phelps, New York, and he really wasn't an army officer as much as he was an inventor, and he was also one of the best marksmen in the world at the time the Civil War began. And so he got permission to form up these companies of sharpshooters, and the test was pretty rigorous to become one of the members of the U.S. Sharpshooters. And remember, I told you that the companies were all based on states. So certain states would contribute an entire company, and these guys would have to be, really, really proficient shooters, really great marksmen. And these guys carried not a muzzleloading rifle like the Enfield that many of the Civil War infantry soldiers carried, but they carried Sharps carbines, and Sharps carbines were invented by a guy named, I think, Christian Sharp, and they were a breech loading rifle, and they would fire around, I think it was like 52 caliber. But the rate of fire during the Civil War for experienced troops with that rifle would be 8 to 10 shots a minute, and which is about 3 times the rate of fire for a very proficient infantryman with a muzzle loading rifle. And so one of the things that these guys did in the U.S. Sharpshooters is they would, operate as companies, certainly, and even form up with other companies to make, larger forces, what we would call a battalion force. But they often operated in 4-man groups, and they did so here in Gettysburg. Not all the time in Gettysburg, but they did so to slow down Confederate infantry. They moved with alacrity, and they were kind of operated independently. And the interesting thing about that 4-man group is that's the same grouping that we use today in our military for fire teams in Army squads and Marine infantry squads. 4 people is a fire team. These guys, way before we really perfected the infantry tactics we use today, they were operating in 4-man groups, and I just thought it was really interesting. The other thing, you've seen some of the terrain, how it's not necessarily open fields, a lot of woods, a lot of fighting in dense woods in very hilly terrain here at Gettysburg. A lot of times when people come here, they don't necessarily see all the spots on the battlefield that there was significant fighting, in part because they stay on the roads, and even when they get out of their car, you don't really notice how rough the terrain is around here, how demanding it is on you physically to move around. And so I just thought that was kind of an interesting aspect. Oh, one more thing about Burden sharpshooters. At least early in the war, they were outfitted with uniforms that weren't the Union blue, And by the way, the Union Blue would have a frock coat that was dark blue, what we might call almost navy blue. But then they had trousers that were much lighter in color, like kind of steel blue. But Burden's Sharpshooters wore forest green outfits. In other words, they wore uniforms to blend in with their surroundings. I won't necessarily call it camouflage, but it would certainly anticipate, military uniforms trying to help soldiers blend in more. So anyway, I guess that's my report from Gettysburg today. Okay, so still on the battlefield. On my right, and by the way, I'm on the Emmitsburg Road heading into Gettysburg, so I'm heading north. I'm just passing the peach orchard on my right, and Seminary Ridge is on my left. So I'm going right up the middle of the battlefield. Cemetery Ridge is on my right, farther up. This farm that I'll pass on my left is the Sherfy farm, and the Sherfys owned the peach orchard where so much combat took place. But anyway, I wanted to talk about a couple of things. Profits at trucking companies are not looking great. I've started to see some reports, and I'll probably talk about those a little more in detail in another video. But today I wanted to talk about what's been my experience over the past couple of weeks, because I decided, after the 1st of October that I was going to think about getting back in the truck. So I did that, and I kind of decided that since I had to go back through the application process at the company I was at, because they couldn't just manage to give me a leave of absence when I needed it, I was like, well, if I got to start applying to companies, I might as well apply to companies that I might want to work at, more than the company I was at. And as I've said many times before, by the way, this is the Kadori farm that I'm passing, that's on the right here. So I started applying for jobs, and I did, and I've learned a lot of interesting things. Although, to be candid, one of the things that I've learned is that trucking companies haven't learned. And what I mean by that is that I did this the first thing I did was like this shotgun application, which I know is just a revenue generator for some companies that do, it just creates clicks and advertisement. But the interesting thing is that, I got responses from all sorts of companies, and they ran the gamut from I would never work for you for that amount of money, to I can't believe how unprofessional these recruiters are. And so, as you might imagine, now I'm into the borough of Gettysburg. I'm actually going to go in. I actually am going back to Maryland, but even though I'm headed north right now, because I'm going in Emmitsburg Road, and then when I get up to the intersection with the Baltimore Pike, I'm going to flip back around, and I'll actually be going down the backside of Cemetery Ridge. So anyway, I got this text message from a guy, and I'll say the company, it's CRST. I don't remember the guy's name, but as you may know, if you've watched this channel for any period of time, everybody calls me Terry, but my first name is actually Terrence. Now, I got to tell this little bit of a backstory. A long time ago, I was getting a driver's license in Virginia, and that was back when they would just make the licenses, and then they would call everybody, they would just call out your name at the DMV. And this woman, this, you know, blonde gal, probably in her 20s, that was working at the Virginia DMV, calls out my name. And when I came up to get the license, she said, "Terrence, that's a black person's name." And so with that in mind, I got this message, and it was like, and you know, I have friends, and you know, people that I'm friendly with, and you know, we don't necessarily call each other by our given names. Sometimes we call each other brother or whatever, and you know, I feel that camaraderie. But this guy was like, he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna text you in the morning," and you know, so then he sent me a text, and he's like, "What's up, brother T? You know, you got time to talk?" And I was like, and I texted him back, I'm like, "Brother T," like, and I put that in quotes and question marks. I'm like, dude, like, you don't know me, you know, and I don't know if that's how he just rolls with everybody, but it just seemed really odd to me that a recruiter, you know, would do that. Like, it's not professional. If we were friends, or we had at least talked for a little bit, you know, chopped it up, whatever you want to say, maybe that would be different. So now I just flipped basically a UB. I'm headed south towards Littlestown, Pennsylvania. And on my right-hand side will be the entrance to the Gettysburg National Cemetery. It's got a really beautiful gate, actually. And then on my left is what is called East Cemetery Hill. And it's kind of the start of Cemetery Ridge. So anyway, I'm like, I just don't, I mean, look, let's be honest, I wasn't going to go to work for CRST anyway, although they keep sending me texts. But like, even if I wouldn't a recruiter want to put their best foot forward? And I guess I've talked about like how little DMs are paid. And so I guess it shouldn't surprise me that recruiters are doing whatever they can to be successful, and you know, just doing things that are not that professional. But one of the questions that came up in my mind, or maybe I was anticipating somebody else's questions, are, is it illegal for a recruiter to lie to you? And so to answer that question, not really. But a lot of times you'll see people doing videos, or you'll see people online, social media, talking about how a recruiter lied to them. And I like to give people the benefit of the doubt sometimes. I do think there are recruiters who know damn right well that what they're saying is patently false. Like, it's not ever gonna be true, whatever they're saying. But I think there are lots of other recruiters who have zero idea about what the job really entails. And so when they say something, it doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. It just means they probably were told that, or maybe they're just guessing. And you know, I noticed that a long time ago with a recruiter from CFI. I talked to her and I said, "Well, what's the rate of pay?" And like almost the first thing out of her mouth was, "Well, you can earn $2,000 for referring another driver." And I responded by saying, "Well, isn't that kind of putting the cart before the horse?" And I was asking her questions, and she was saying, "Well, you'll find out when you get here." That's not a good enough answer. But I had another recruiter, you know, that called me. I've had several call me. I got a call from Western Express. Didn't apply there, but I got a call from them. And I said, "Well, what do you guys, you know, I have 6 years plus experience. What do you guys pay?" And she was like, "Oh, we pay 45 cents a mile for van and 53 cents a mile for flatbed." And I was like, no thanks. You know, 45 cents a mile. And I've had a few people, I've known a few people that were at Western Express, and they've said, you know, a lot of times you don't get what, you know, you don't hit milestones to get bonuses and stuff. And I always feel like there's probably an algorithm that companies are using, because I had experienced the same thing at J&R Shugel, where I had to hit 9,500 miles to get my $500 monthly bonus, and I would miss it like 2 out of every 3 months, and I wouldn't miss it, and I would have been like, I remember one time I was on the road the entire month, like I did not go home the entire month, and I still ended up with like 9,438 miles. So anyway, I guess where I'm going with this is that there are still a lot of companies recruiting really hard, and the truth of the matter is they don't have the work. In fact, one of the companies that I've talked to, I decided to see what people had to say about them on YouTube. So I went to a YouTube video, and it was from like a couple of years ago, and I asked this guy, or I didn't ask him. I said, you know, like I wanted to see what he had to say about this company. So I watched the orientation video that he did, and then he did some other videos like a few months later, like 3-4 months later, and somebody on those videos recently asked him, so like a year after that video was made, they asked, hey, are you still at that company? And he's like, no, I didn't stay there because they didn't get the account that they hired me for. So this guy went through the hiring process, got on a plane, went to this company, and went through orientation, and then they kind of drive him around a little bit where he makes some money, but they don't really have the miles for him to run. And it kind of reminded me of when I went to the orientation for now my mind slips, for the company up in New York, and I'll think of it in a minute. But I went to their orientation. I was there for 4 days. They assigned me a truck, and then they're like, yeah, we don't have a position for you. I was like, okay. And so you need to keep in mind, if this is your first foray into trucking, you're gonna experience stuff that's pretty weird. Although it is not unique to this industry. There are lots of like social media places where you'll find people that say, yeah, I was hired by a company, and then I was given an offer, but they didn't tell me when to start. And I kept asking them, and they just kind of ghosted me. Or somebody will come and they'll say, hey, you know, you could start on this day. They go there, and like by the end of the week, they get laid off. And that's really crappy, but it does happen. So just know you might be going to a company that does not have work for you, but because they're so used to high turnover, they don't really shut the machine off that is the recruiting machine. And you may be getting recruited for a place that does not have a job. It may sound good, but they don't actually have work for you. And it's like when I was at well companies, you know, I was familiar with them. Seemed like they had a pretty good situation. Everybody was nice. But then when the rubber met the road and I was actually out on the road, I would spend a lot of time sitting around. And recently a guy commented on one of those videos that I did about well, And he says, well, why would you care if you were making $1,250 a week, guaranteed? Why would you care? And my response is, I don't want to sit around in a truck that's, like a little shed, essentially, on wheels. I don't want to be sitting in Ohio or Illinois or someplace that I don't live and not having the ability to make money. I want to stop for my 10 hours and then have something to do. I don't need to stop. I don't need to get 234s in a week that were unnecessary. I know how to run my clock. And the thing is that, yeah, you would get that $1,250, but then after taxes, you're looking at maybe you're bringing home $1,000. And really, for them to cover the $1,250, if you ran more than like 1,900 miles, you weren't going to get the guarantee because you would be above it. But who wants to go out and be gone for 7 days and run only 1,900 miles? Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to average. And I think I did the math. I think if you averaged 236 miles a day, that they wouldn't have to pay on the guarantee. It would just be straight CPM. But who wants to only run 236 miles a day as an over-the-road trucker? I had another company which was national carriers, right? So national beef. They said we pay 50 to 58 cents. I think 50 to 58 or maybe 50 to 56 based on experience. I have over 6 years of experience. And I can document that. So I said, oh, well, you're looking at how much experience, you're looking at my application. What would I get paid? And the guy says 50 cents a mile. And I'm like, in my mind, I was like, well, okay, to get 56, what do you got to have, like 40 years experience? I mean, so they say we pay 50 to 56, but that's not really true. What they should say is we start you at 50, and at some point in the future, you might get to 56, which, by the way, is not that good. 56 is not that good. I was making 56 cents a mile probably 4 years ago or so. It's not that good. I talked to another company and they said, what would you like to do, van or reefer? I said van. And immediately I get things that say, oh, hey, we have this dedicated reefer route. And I'm like, I don't want dedicated and I don't want reefer. Why? And why do they waste that time? I don't know. Yeah, so recruiting hasn't really changed. But I do honestly believe that some of these companies are recruiting people and have no actual work for you to do. Oh, sure, they'll get you 1,800 miles a week, but who wants to go out for 7 days and run 1,800 miles? And you do the math, right? Like your gross checks in a scenario like that are going to be like, $1,000 a week or something. And honestly, even when there's a gross check of $1,250, like with a guarantee, it's still not enough for me. I'm not willing to be gone for 7 days. And keep in mind that, you're not just gone for 7 days. I'm saying it's 7 days in a week. Truthfully, you're going to be, at least for me, out for, 5 or 6 weeks. And a lot of companies promote home time. And I actually think home time is code for we don't have that much work. And, a lot of guys will say, oh, well, I want to get my home time. For me, home time doesn't matter if it's not when I want to be home. And what I mean by that is it's always good to be home. It's always good to be home. And honestly, I've been home a lot recently, a lot. And so it does get harder to go back on the road. And that's why when I was OTR, I would always stay out longer, because I want a longer time at home. You're able to get more done. You're able to, when you go home for like a 34, a lot of guys, it takes them 24 hours just to acclimate to being home. And I'm probably one of them. So I don't want to go, I don't want to constantly be trying to get home, because when you're trying to get home too, it's costly. Unless you live right where loads are delivered or picked up, which most of us don't. So anyway, if you're out there and you're new to this industry and you're trying to break into it, just be true to yourself and ask. Don't be afraid to ask questions, because I can tell you from personal experience, getting a job with a company like Leonard's Express, which was, I knew I would think of it. Leonard's Express was the company that had me come to orientation, put me up in a hotel for 4 days, and then was like, yeah, we don't have a job for you. And I even asked, is there something I did wrong? No. Like, I was qualified, I passed all their tests, I did everything I was supposed to, passed the physical. They're like, oh, we don't have a job for you. Why'd you waste my time then? And the other thing that I've learned recently is a lot of these recruiters, if you send out for information, they'll be like, oh, I don't want to talk to you, and if you put an application, then I'll answer your questions. Don't fall for that. The recruiters are doing that because part of their compensation is based on, or part of them keeping their job is based on how many applications they process. So they don't care who applies, they just want a lot of applications. And I'm not about playing that game. So anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions that people have about the recruiting process. And I'm certainly not the only one. I talked to a guy, I don't know, a few months ago, that he just described this process where he did everything he was supposed to, and he told them about stuff, and then they came back and they're like, oh, you didn't put this on your application and stuff. So they're always going to find a reason, which is ironic because you're an at-will employee anyway, but they're going to find some excuse to let somebody go if they don't have work. And that's why it happens. It's not because you're a bad applicant. It's not because you forgot something on your application. It's because they actually don't have the work for you. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.